The laughter hit me before the words could fully sink in. My own parents, sitting less than 10 feet away, were covering their mouths and shaking their heads like I had just told the dumbest joke in the world. $10. That was my inheritance. My father leaned toward my mother, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, loud enough for the whole conference room to hear. $10, huh? Guess that is what happens when you waste your life on silly hobbies. My mother let out a sharp little laugh, the kind she used when humiliating someone in public. A cousin smirked. An aunt tried to hide her grin behind her hand. The lawyer's voice had been perfectly clear a moment ago. To Emily Harper, the sum of $10. No explanation, no apology. Just $10. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker, pressing down on me as every glance carried the same unspoken message: you are nothing. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my palms damp against the polished table. This was exactly the kind of scene my parents lived for an audience and a victim. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth ached, forcing my face to stay neutral. I would not give them tears. Not here. Not ever. The Harper family had always performed their cruelty like it was theater. Every smirk, every whispered insult, every pointed comparison to my older brother Lucas had been rehearsed over decades. And now this was their final act, stripping me of dignity in front of every relative who mattered in their world. Mr. Whitaker, the family lawyer, cleared his throat, the sound slicing through the snickering. Actually, he said, adjusting his glasses, "There is also a private letter addressed only to Emily Harper." The laughter stopped instantly. The silence that followed was almost violent. My father's expression twitched just for a second before snapping back into a mask of smugness. My mother blinked too quickly, her eyes narrowing in a way that told me she was calculating something. The rest of the room shifted in their seats, curiosity replacing mockery. Private letter. My father said, his tone sharp. She already got what she deserved. There is nothing else to discuss. Mr. Whitaker didn't even look at him. The letter was left in my custody with explicit instructions. It will be given directly to Emily in private. Would you please follow me to the adjoining office? I stood slow and deliberate, feeling the weight of every stare on my back as I moved. The carpet muffled my steps, but inside my blood was roaring. I didn't look at anyone. Not Lucas, not the cousins craning their necks to watch me, not the aunts clutching their pearls as if I were carrying a weapon. I kept my eyes on Mr. Whitaker's broad shoulders as he led me down the short hallway. The door closed behind us with a soft click, and for the first time since I entered the building, I could breathe. On the desk in front of me sat a thick cream envelope with my name written in firm, deliberate cursive. I knew instantly my grandfather's handwriting. My fingers twitched to grab it, but I waited for Mr. Whitaker's nod. "This is yours," he said simply. My heart thudded against my ribs. Why did they look scared? What could possibly be in here that would rattle the Harpers? I took the envelope with both hands, its weight solid and undeniable. Whatever was inside, I knew one thing: this was not over. It was just beginning. I had been preparing for humiliation my entire life, but not like this. Growing up in the Harper family meant understanding that value was measured in net worth and obedience. Lucas, my older brother, learned that early. He could close a deal at 16, shake hands with corporate partners twice his age, and wear a suit like it was his second skin. I, on the other hand, preferred paint-stained jeans and a camera around my neck. While Lucas sat at the head of the table during family dinners, discussing stock prices with my father, I was the afterthought, the silent seat filler. My mother used to tell me, "Emily, no one will respect you until you do something worth respecting." She meant their kind of respect, wealth, control, conformity. What she never said out loud was that love in our house came with conditions. I could have forgiven the constant belittling if it had been harmless, but it never was. Every decision I made was turned into evidence of my incompetence. I chose art school over business school. They called it a tantrum. I worked side jobs to pay rent. They said I was playing poor. Even when I sold my first photograph for more than I made in a month, my father scoffed. "Cute. Now try doing it without starving." It wasn't just words. Over the years, they found ways to remind me I didn't belong. Family investments were for the future, Lucas's future. When the company sponsored charities, my proposals were dismissed before the ink dried. Once, after I bailed them out of a PR disaster by donating my work for free to a campaign, my mother said, "You actually weren't terrible this time." That was her version of praise. And yet, I still showed up. I still went to holiday dinners, smiled through the cutting remarks, sent birthday gifts they barely acknowledged. Part of me believed that if I endured long enough, they might finally see me as more than the family embarrassment. The will reading destroyed that illusion in seconds. $10. It wasn't about the money. I'd long since stopped expecting anything from them financially. It was about the message: you are worth less than the paper this check is printed on. The smirks, the laughter, the way my father leaned back like he had finally won. It was a public execution of my place in the family. That was the cost. Not just dignity, but identity. I had been erased from the Harper legacy. And then came the private letter. The shift in their faces when Mr. Whitaker mentioned it told me everything I needed to know. They weren't afraid of losing $10. They were afraid of what I might gain. If there was one thing I understood about my parents, it was this: fear meant weakness, and weakness could be exploited. As I held that envelope in my hands, I realized something sharp and undeniable. I didn't just want to prove them wrong. I wanted to dismantle the image they had built of themselves brick by brick in front of everyone who thought they were untouchable. This wasn't about winning their approval anymore. This was about taking the power they thought they owned and using it against them. The stakes were no longer personal. They were total. My family had spent years ensuring I stayed invisible. Now, I was going to make sure they couldn't look anywhere without seeing me. The Harper name carried weight in every boardroom from New York to London. My parents wore it like armor, polished and impenetrable. Behind closed doors, it was a weapon. Lucas was their golden child from the moment he was born, a living extension of their ambitions. By the time he was in high school, he was already shadowing my father at corporate meetings, learning to navigate mergers and acquisitions like they were weekend puzzles. At the same age, I was sneaking out to photograph city streets at dawn, capturing chipped paint on old shop signs, or the way light fell through broken windows. My father never once asked to see a single photograph. My mother did once. She picked up a print of a little boy chasing pigeons in the rain, studied it for a few seconds, then set it down. "You know the problem with this," she said. "No one's going to pay for something that sad." I was 13. That was the same year I overheard my parents in the study after a board meeting. "She needs to wake up," my father said. "Dreams don't pay for legacy." My mother's voice was softer, but not kinder. "She'll fall in line eventually." Those words followed me for years. Fall in line. As if my life was a parade they had planned, and all I had to do was march to the beat they chose. Every family gathering became a performance review I could never pass. When Lucas landed a major investor for the company at 21, there was a champagne toast in his honor. When I landed my first gallery show, my father said, "How much did it cost you to rent the walls?" Even my successes were rewritten as failures in their narrative. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Lucas got the guest house on the family estate as his starter home. I got a used bicycle for my 18th birthday. When the company launched a creative outreach program, I applied to run it only to find out the position had been handed to one of Lucas's college friends before my proposal was even read. They didn't just underestimate me, they made sure everyone else did too. The message was clear: Emily is the one you don't take seriously. And Lucas played his part well. He never defended me, never challenged them, because the system worked for him. I remember one Thanksgiving when the conversation turned to family roles. My father said Lucas is the head, Emily is the free spirit. My mother laughed. Yes, the kind who floats away when there's real work to be done. I laughed too, because what else could I do in a family like ours? You survived by pretending the knife in your back was just part of the uniform. But the truth was, every jab, every dismissal, every backhanded remark was filing away in the quiet locked drawer of my memory. They thought they were breaking me down. What they didn't realize was that they were building something else entirely resolve. I had learned their weaknesses over the years, the cracks under the glossy veneer. I knew how much they feared scandal. I knew how tightly they clung to the illusion of unity of the perfect Harper brand. And I knew with absolute certainty that if I ever got the chance, I could pull that facade down in one move. That letter in my purse felt like the key to a locked room I had been standing outside my whole life. And when I stepped inside, I wasn't going to just rearrange the furniture. I was going to burn the place down. Mr. Whitaker left me alone in the adjoining office, the envelope sitting in front of me like a loaded gun. My hands hovered over it for a moment, steady but buzzing with adrenaline. When I finally broke the wax seal, the smell of old paper and faint cologne hit me, my grandfather's cologne. The first words stopped me cold. I'm sorry for the performance in that room. I needed them to show you who they really are when they think you have nothing. My pulse kicked up. He went on to explain that the $10 inheritance was a decoy, a deliberate insult designed to provoke the exact reaction I'd just witnessed. The real inheritance had been shielded from the public reading. I was now the sole beneficiary of the Harper Cultural Trust, an unpublicized arm of the family's wealth, worth far more than the visible estate. Attached were documents confirming my full control over a penthouse studio on Beacon Street, a private gallery, and 68% ownership in the trust's diversified portfolio. The trust's assets were quiet but enormous art collections, prime real estate, even controlling shares in companies my parents didn't know were linked to our name. My grandfather had moved them into the trust years ago out of their reach. It was a chess move so precise that it stunned me, because it meant he'd been planning this for a long time. And then came the part that set the fire in my chest ablaze. This inheritance comes with no obligation except one: do not become them. Use it to build something worth your name, not theirs. But Emily, if they ever come for you, make sure they regret it. I read the letter twice more, committing every line to memory. Then I slid the documents back into the envelope, tucking it into my bag like contraband. When I stepped back into the main room, their laughter had returned, but it was tighter now, forced. My father's eyes followed me as I crossed to my chair. My mother's fingers tapped against her necklace, a nervous tick I'd only seen during high-stakes board negotiations. They knew something was different. They just didn't know what. Yet. That night, I didn't go home. I went straight to the Beacon Street penthouse, used the brass key from the envelope, and stepped into a sunlit space that felt like stepping into an entirely different life. The walls were lined with my photographs, prints I thought had been sold or lost. He'd bought them all under aliases, framed them, cataloged them. My work had been here waiting for me while my parents mocked me for wasting my time. I ran my fingers over the frames, each one a reminder of the years they told me I was nothing. My phone buzzed. A text from Lucas: "Guess you'll be framing that check." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and started making lists. Lawyers, accountants, PR strategists. If my grandfather had given me this power, I wasn't going to hide it forever. But when I revealed it, it would be on my terms in a way they couldn't control or spin. That's when the revenge plan started to take shape, not a messy outburst, but a calculated strike. I wanted them blindsided. I wanted them to choke on the shock. And most of all, I wanted the rest of the world to see the Harpers exactly the way I saw them: shallow, entitled, and utterly beatable. The letter was the spark, but the breaking point came 3 days later. I was in the Beacon Street penthouse, cataloging the trust's assets with a corporate attorney my grandfather had vetted, when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring out. Then came Lucas. Then my father. By the fourth missed call in under an hour, I knew they were circling. They could smell the shift, but couldn't locate the source. That night, Lucas showed up uninvited. He had that smug smile he used when he thought he was in control. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting. "About what?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "About you playing games. You embarrassed the family at the will reading, and now Dad's furious." I almost laughed. "I embarrassed the family, I didn't even open my mouth." His jaw tightened. "Don't get clever. We know Whitaker gave you something. What was it? A pity letter, stocks worth pocket change. You should just hand it over before you do something stupid with it." That was the moment I decided there was no room for mercy in my plan. They weren't just arrogant. They were already trying to strip me of what they didn't even understand. I stepped toward him close enough that he had to tilt his head back slightly. "Lucas, the day I hand anything over to you will be the day I forget every insult every time you stood by while they tore me down." Which is never. He blinked, clearly not expecting pushback. "You think you're dangerous now because Grandpa slipped you a consolation prize? You have no idea how this family works." I smiled, not because I was amused, but because I knew something he didn't. "No, Lucas, you have no idea how I work." I walked to the door and opened it. You should leave before I decide to tell the press exactly what our perfect family does behind closed doors. His face went red, but he left. That night I called Mr. Whitaker. I want to make an announcement, I said. Not to them, not yet to the public, but I want it to be more than a press release. I want it to be an event. We spent the next week building the bones of my strike. The gallery would host a show called The Inheritance of Truth. Every photograph would be mine, spanning from my earliest street shots to the most recent work. The $10 check would be displayed under museum-grade lighting, framed like a priceless artifact, with a plaque that read, "Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the loudest truth." Invitations would go to art critics, investors, journalists, and of course, my family. By the time they walked into that space, the world would already be watching. They wouldn't be able to dismiss me quietly. They would have to do it under the glare of cameras and the weight of public opinion. That was the point of no return. I wasn't just going to take my place in the family's legacy. I was going to rewrite it so they couldn't touch it again. The first wave of outside pressure came faster than I expected. The gallery invitations had barely been out for 48 hours when the first call came from a prominent arts columnist. He'd gotten a preview of the title and the concept, The Inheritance of Truth, and wanted an exclusive interview. I declined, but the seed was planted. 2 days later, a glossy magazine reached out with the same request, followed by a niche art blog, then a local news station. The buzz wasn't about me yet, it was about the mystery. Who was the Harper behind this sudden high-profile debut, and what did inheritance mean in this context? I knew it would drive my parents crazy. The Harper name was being circulated in a context they couldn't control. Meanwhile, the PR strategist Whitaker connected me with was carefully feeding select pieces of information to the press. My background as an outsider in the Harper family, my work as a photographer, the fact that my show would be invitation only, but attended by significant art world figures. No lies, just enough truth to build tension. Then the art blog ran a speculative piece connecting the event to the will reading. They quoted an anonymous source describing a $10 inheritance and visible tension in the room that day. I didn't have to guess who the source was. Lucas had a big mouth and a love for attention. The piece went mildly viral, and suddenly, the idea that the black sheep of the Harper family was staging some kind of artistic counterattack became the narrative. The calls to my phone doubled. Lucas texted me, "What the hell are you doing?" I ignored him. My mother sent a short email. "We need to discuss your event. Urgent." I ignored that too. My father tried a different angle, calling Whitaker directly demanding details. Whitaker simply said, "You'll have to attend to find out." It was perfect. Every attempt they made to pry only fed the sense that something was happening without their consent. And that for my parents was the ultimate insult. Outside of the family drama, the show itself was becoming a legitimate art world moment. A renowned critic RSVP'd, as did the head curator of a major museum. Collectors who'd never spoken to me before were suddenly eager to connect. I knew why they smelled controversy, and controversy sells. Good. Let them come for the spectacle. They'd stay for the reckoning. A week before the opening, I got a call from a reporter with a reputation for eviscerating the wealthy in long-form exposés. She said she was writing about legacy families and the ways they silenced dissenters, and she wanted to feature me. I told her, "Come to the show. I'll give you my answer in person." The day before the event, I spotted my mother's name in the society pages, attending a charity gala, in a gown that cost more than most people's cars. The photo caught her mid-smile, but her eyes looked tense. The caption noted that she declined to comment on the upcoming Harper Gallery event. She was already on the defensive. Perfect. The outside forces weren't just circling anymore. They were converging. The night before opening, I stood alone in the gallery, looking at the final installation. The check, the plaque, the photographs, it was all ready. And somewhere in the city, my parents were rehearsing their masks for the cameras. They didn't know it yet, but the masks were about to crack. Opening night was electric before the doors even opened. Outside, a crowd had gathered invited guests, mingling with curious onlookers and photographers, hoping to catch a headline-worthy shot. The air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that clings to your skin. Inside, the Harper Light studio glowed under carefully staged lighting, each photograph curated to tell a story, each wall a chapter, in my silent rebellion. The centerpiece, the $10 check framed behind glass, sat in its own pool of light, the plaque beneath it daring anyone to laugh. I stood near the entrance dressed in a black satin jumpsuit, no jewelry except the brass key from my grandfather's envelope hanging on a thin chain around my neck. Guests trickled in their reactions, predictable intrigue whispers the occasional gasp. The art critic from the Times lingered in front of a portrait of an abandoned train station jotting notes. The museum curator paused at a candid street shot of a child staring through a chain-link fence, her eyes bright with recognition. And then they arrived. My parents swept in like they owned the room, Lucas trailing behind. My mother wore her pearls like armor, my father, his tailored suit like a weapon. Their eyes scanned the gallery, calculating. They spotted me and approached, smiles tight enough to cut glass. Quite the show, my mother said, her tone dripping with condescension. Did someone help you arrange all this? Just one person, I said, glancing toward the $10 exhibit. My father followed my gaze, and his expression flickered. Lucas tried to mask his curiosity, but I saw the question in his eyes. Before they could press me, Mr. Whitaker stepped onto the small platform at the center of the room and tapped the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the debut exhibition of Harper Light Studio, founded by and dedicated to the vision of Emily Harper. He paused just long enough for cameras to focus. What many of you don't know is that Emily is also the sole beneficiary of the Harper Cultural Trust, a private legacy built and preserved by Walter Harper himself. A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw tightened like a vice. Lucas blinked rapidly, as if replaying the words to confirm he'd heard them right. Whitaker continued. Walter Harper believed in legacy shaped by merit, not entitlement. Tonight's exhibition is a testament to that belief. Applause erupted, and I stepped onto the platform. Thank you. I said, my voice steady but sharp enough to slice through the air. A year ago, I stood in a room where I was handed a check for $10 and told without words exactly what my worth was. Tonight, I'm here to return the favor by showing you what that $10 bought me: clarity, freedom, and the resolve to never let anyone else define my value again. I looked directly at my parents. Some people inherit titles or money. I inherited the truth, and I built something with it. The applause swelled, cameras flashing. My parents stood frozen, caught between the urge to leave and the fear of making a scene. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his confidence unraveling. I stepped down from the platform and moved past them back into the crowd. They could stay or they could walk out. It didn't matter. The world had just seen who I really was, and by contrast, who they really were. And that was the strike. Not a shout, not a fight, but a public, undeniable rewriting of the family narrative, one they couldn't erase. The fallout began before the last guest left the gallery. In the corner, I caught sight of a local news crew interviewing the art critic, who was gesturing animatedly toward the $10 check and using words like defiant and transformative. Behind them, my mother and father were locked in tense whispers with Lucas, their expressions brittle under the gallery lights. They left without saying goodbye, slipping out a side door to avoid more cameras. By the time I got home to the penthouse, the first headlines had hit: heiress turns humiliation into public masterpiece, $10 inheritance sparks cultural uproar. My phone was buzzing, non-stop calls from reporters, messages from strangers thanking me for standing up to toxic family power, plays invitations to speak at panels on art and legacy. And then the real blow landed: a leaked memo from within my father's company, showing they were scrambling to contain the PR disaster. Investors were asking questions. Board members were demanding answers about the Harper family's treatment of its own. 2 days later, a journalist published a feature titled, "The Harpers, a Legacy Cracked." It detailed the family's history of controlling behavior, quoting unnamed insiders about the will reading and the public embarrassment. Though no names were attached to the sources, the story painted a damning picture. And it was clear enough to anyone paying attention who the villains were. I didn't have to lift a finger. They were imploding on their own. My mother called once, leaving a voicemail that started calm but unraveled into something jagged. You think you've won, but you've just destroyed everything we built. Do you understand what you've done? I deleted it without saving. Lucas sent a text. You made your point. Happy now I didn't respond. Word came from Whitaker that the Harper Cultural Trust was now receiving offers to partner on major exhibitions, each proposal emphasizing the independence of the current leadership. Translation, they wanted me, not them. The best part, they couldn't touch it. My grandfather's legal structure was airtight. Their only move would be to challenge it publicly, which would mean dragging their humiliation into the spotlight again. They wouldn't risk it. 1 week after the opening, I heard through a friend in the finance world that one of my father's major deals had collapsed. The investor had pulled out, citing concerns about public image. The family name, their prized currency, was losing value, and all I had done was tell the truth in a room full of people. That was the real revenge. They were learning what it felt like to be powerless in a story they couldn't control. In the weeks following the opening, I moved through the city like someone who had finally stepped out from under a shadow. My mornings began in the sunlit corner of the Beacon Street penthouse, coffee in hand, reviewing proposals from curators and artists who actually valued my work. The Harper Light Studio was booked solid for the next year, each exhibition handpicked by me, each one carrying a piece of the truth I had fought to claim. Invitations poured in, gallery talks, photography panels, even a keynote at an art philanthropy conference. I said yes to the ones that aligned with my vision, and no to the ones that smelled like they just wanted the Harper name. That was the new rule: my name, my terms. The press coverage hadn't slowed either. Photos from the exhibition, especially the $10 check installation, were still circulating online, tagged with captions like, "Value is not inheritance." People I had never met sent me messages about how my story had given them the courage to walk away from their own toxic families. I read every one, not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me why I had done this in the first place, not just to settle a score, but to reclaim the narrative of my life. Whitaker called one afternoon with news that solidified everything. The trust's latest valuation just came in, he said. Your grandfather's investments in cultural assets have doubled in value over the last 5 years. You have more financial freedom now than your parents ever thought possible, and there's nothing they can do about it. I thanked him, but inside I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about how quiet my phone had been. No more guilt-laden voicemails, no more backhanded comments disguised as concern. The silence was its own inheritance. One evening I walked through the studio alone after closing. The lights were dim, but the photographs glowed softly in their frames. I stopped in front of a portrait I had taken years ago. A young boy leaning against a graffiti-covered wall, eyes fierce despite the crumbling world around him. I had titled it Unbroken. Back then I thought I was just documenting a moment. Now I realized I had been telling my own story before I even knew it. For so long, I had been the one sitting quietly at the end of the table, the one they underestimated, the one they laughed at. Now I was the one holding the pen, writing the ending they never saw coming. And for the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for approval or bracing for the next betrayal. I was simply moving forward, eyes wide open, camera in hand, ready to capture whatever came next. The Harper name might still be theirs on paper, but the legacy that was mine now, entirely. On the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's passing, I hosted an event at the Harper Light Studio. Not a gala, not a press stunt, but an open house for emerging artists. The residency program I had launched was now in full swing, and the gallery's top floor had been transformed into live workspaces filled with canvases, cameras, and the hum of creation. The guests were students, street photographers, young painters, who still carried the raw hunger I remembered in myself. No one here cared about my last name. They cared about the work, the vision, and the opportunities that were now theirs to seize. In the main hall, I had hung one new installation, the $10 check, now surrounded by a ring of small black frames, each holding a single word, handwritten by one of the residents, Freedom, Voice, Truth, Rebellion. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to earn their worth by surviving the kind of humiliation I had. Whitaker came by late in the evening, moving quietly through the crowd. Your grandfather would be proud, he said simply. I nodded, But my eyes stayed on the young woman across the room, showing her work to a group of donors. Her hands moving as fast as her words, her eyes alight. "I hope so," I said, "because I'm not building this to make them proud. I'm building it so no one like me ever has to sit through what I did." The truth was, revenge had been my fuel in the beginning. I had wanted them to feel small, exposed, powerless. And they had. But along the way, I realized that real victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in my freedom. They could keep their boardrooms, their fake smiles, their brittle hierarchy. I had something they could never reclaim, the power to define my life on my terms. As the night wound down, I stepped outside onto the balcony. The city sprawled out below, lights stretching in every direction. A year ago, I would have been standing in some corner, making myself invisible. Now I felt the opposite, present, grounded, unirradiated. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've made your point. Can we talk? L. Lucas." I put the phone down without replying. Some doors once closed stay closed for good. When the last guest left, I walked back inside and turned off the lights, leaving only the glow around the $10 check. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a marker, a reminder of the exact moment I stopped living in their version of my life and started living in mine. My grandfather had been right. The smallest inheritance was the greatest test, and I had passed it not by becoming them, but by refusing to.